All right, let's talk about Descartes' wax, and then we'll move forward to see what his proof of the existence of God is supposed to get him. After the second meditation, Descartes has convinced himself that he exists and that he is a thinking thing. And he's trying to make sure that he's got cemented in his mind what he knows about himself and what he doesn't. And what is it that's doing the knowing? Right? One of the things that he really wants to get out of this section of Meditation 3, Meditation 4 is an assurance that he understands what it feels like to be certain. He wants, having discovered certainty, I think therefore I am, I know that I exist, having discovered something that's certain, he wants to be able to see what that certainty consists of. Now it's going to take some steps. He's not going to, even that he exists, somehow is related to his belief that God exists. He somehow is only able to get certainty, even about his own existence, through knowing that God exists. That's a little complicated, and I'm still not sure I buy that as the only interpretation of it, but I think that is what's going on here. Okay, so after proving that he exists and proving that he is a mind, he starts thinking about this lump of wax. So he says, let's break from the thread of the meditations, and let's let some of our old beliefs come in and ask ourselves about this lump of wax. Now, if we're maintaining all the doubts from meditation 1, then yeah, technically you're not trusting your senses. So this wax, even though the senses are telling you that the wax exists, maybe it doesn't. The senses are telling you that this wax is flaky, maybe it's not. I mean, maybe this is all a dream, right? Second doubt. Maybe this is all a dream, and I'm not really here looking at this wax, but instead, I'm in bed dreaming about some wax or something. Or maybe there's an evil demon feeding me the idea of wax, the sensations of wax. So we've got this wax, but what does it mean? Okay, so he wants us to examine the wax and notice a few things about it. First, investigate it with the senses. What do the senses show us? It's got a certain texture, it's got a certain color, it's got a certain smell, it's got a certain shape, and on and on and on, right? Everything that the 5 senses tell us about that wax. So, he's looking at this lump of wax, says, okay, I know some things about it, it seems. And certainly, I know that this wax here exists, it seems. But then he moves the wax over the candle and notice that what he thinks he knows so clearly about the wax all disappears. The color is different. The sound it makes when you tap on it is different. Now there's a little bit of a splash there. The shape, the texture, even the smell has changed because of the heat melting the wax. So, what do I know about this wax? Okay, the main thing that we're discovering about this wax, let's say, right, the way that you apprehend the wax, it actually doesn't have anything to do with the senses. I know that this wax exists, and that this wax, which was here as a solid, is now the same wax here as a liquid. Things have changed, but he apprehends, he recognizes that all the sense inputs have changed, but yet the wax is still there. So some things come and go, the things that you apprehend with the senses, but that you can recognize that it is the wax. It is the same wax there in front of you. That we are apprehending with the mind, not the senses, but we are judging that it's still there. And that judgment is true but it's not something that we're taking from the senses. The senses don't actually seem to be telling us much about the wax. If we try to understand what the wax is through the senses, we're going to find, oh, it's changing out from under us. So still, even when we're investigating the physical world here, the senses are still subject to some doubt. All right. Having done this experiment with the wax, Descartes turns his attention in the third meditation to the existence of God. Now, we covered this fairly well in our lecture last time we met, which I know has been a little while. Sorry about that. So, why is Descartes proving the existence of God here, and how? We've talked about the argument to some extent. So now let's talk about what it's supposed to get us. So Descartes, in the second meditation, discovers that he exists, learns some things about himself. He's trying to discover certainty. He's trying to discover knowledge about the world. The way through is through God, right? He needs God to step in to be a bridge, if you will, between the world as it exists in the mind, the world of your experience, and the world as it exists outside the mind, the external world. Once he can prove that God exists, he can start relying on his reasoning faculties. He can start relying on the fact that his faculties, when used correctly, get him truth about the world. If he doesn't prove that God exists, he thinks maybe nothing. Maybe I don't get any of that proof at all. This is an interesting issue, actually, and one that's still a little more live than people tend to think. Alvin Plantinga makes a similar kind of argument as Descartes, where Descartes says, hey, look, if I know that my mind was created by a perfect being, then I should have every confidence that my mind can get me to truth. I should have every confidence in the things that I figure out with that mind. But if my mind is the result of random chance, for instance, then why should I have any confidence that that mind is going to be capable of getting truth? So it's only through God that Descartes thinks he can get certainty. Okay, but it's not just his knowledge of the external world that's at stake here, but his knowledge in general. Right? It's once Descartes understands that his mind was created by God, that his mind was created by a perfect being, once he's got that, he can start relying on his mind altogether, right? So, external world, yeah, that's where we're going, but that there's a kind of reasoning going on in here, in Descartes' mind, his thought bubble, that can get him certainty, that can get him confidence. Alvin Plantinga brings this up, as I said, and says that, yeah, if you take a evolutionary view of the human mind, then you kind of don't get any knowledge at all. Skepticism's, I mean, it's a legitimate philosophical viewpoint, a strong one, actually. So I don't know if that necessarily is giving up anything. I don't know if that's actually giving anything up to say that, hey, you know, if we don't know that our mind was created by God, then we can't get certainty. Because a lot of philosophers are going to say we don't actually get certainty like that anyway. And, hey, what about the Cartesian circle, right? Descartes says, hey, I know that God exists because I've got this idea in my mind and I can use that idea to prove that God exists. Right? I can reason from the idea in my mind to the existence of this God outside of my mind. That's all well and good, but Antoine Arnauld raises the very powerful objection, becomes known as the Cartesian circle. This becomes known as the Cartesian circle, and he says that, Arnauld says, hey, if you're proving that God exists because you know that your mind is capable of discovering truth like that, but you only get to know that your mind is capable of discovering truth like that because you know that God exists. So there's this terrible circular reasoning, really at the heart of Descartes' project here, that says, hey, if I can trust my mind, I can trust my reasoning because I know that God exists. But I only get to know that God exists by trusting my reasoning. That's the Cartesian circle. Now, I think Descartes has a way out, but it's by having a very odd view of the nature of God here. He has maybe a more modest way out by saying that, hey, I actually can prove that God exists without needing to know that my reasoning is trustworthy. It's a simple intuition, like I think therefore I am. If we're not troubled by I think therefore I am getting me truth like that, then we shouldn't be troubled by the idea of an infinite being must have come from an infinite being. So if he thinks that we can get that argument as simple as that, if we can get the third meditation argument in a simple and kind of self-justifying form, like I can't be wrong when I think I exist, then this is kind of resolved, because the reasoning that he's justifying here isn't just I exist must be true, but it's something deeper. All right, so Descartes, having proved that God exists, is now going to start asking how much he can trust his mind. If God made my mind, then certainly I can discover truth when I'm using my mind properly. Okay, so he needs to back up, and he does this in the fourth meditation. Like, sure, I'm justified in following my reason, but and this is kind of a problem of evil. It's a narrow problem of evil, a problem of error. It's interesting, actually. People divide good and evil into different kinds. A very common division of kinds of evil that you find in Leibniz, for instance, says that there's three kinds. There's metaphysical evil, there's physical evil, and there's moral evil, where metaphysical evil is some kind of imperfection in general. What that means, there's lots of discussion about that. Physical evil is pain, suffering, maybe damage also, right? Like organ damage. Although that might be metaphysical. The boundaries between here are debated, which is fun. And then there's moral evil, that's sin. Maybe vice also. Okay, so we've got those three divisions. What about epistemic, right? If we've got metaphysics, physics, the world of changing things, ethics, what about epistemology, that other branch of philosophy? Epistemic evil, error, not ignorance. Ignorance is not necessarily an evil, right? There's lots of things that I don't know, and that's no imperfection on me. But error, right? Thinking something's true when it turns out not to be true. That's a mistake. So Descartes, obviously, if he says he can trust his mind because it was made by a perfect being, he's got a problem that needs to be addressed. Hey, if God made my mind, not only should I be able to find truth, but it seems like I should never make mistakes. Now, clearly, I don't know how long you've been living, I make a lot of mistakes, right? And some of them I even discover later that it was a mistake. So if you've made mistakes, then you got something to explain here. Why can I trust my mind? Just because, yeah, God made it, okay, so it should be good, but I know it's gone wrong in the past. I know it goes wrong with some regularity, so what's up? So what Descartes needs to do is show that these errors, these mistakes, aren't the fault of the way God made your mind, but rather, I mean, what else could it be? Rather, the way that you use your mind. So he needs to be able to say that I can trust my reason when I'm using it properly, but still have some space to say that I sometimes, run away with myself. I sometimes make errors that don't involve an imperfection of the mind. It's just, I've used it wrong. Okay, so let's think about what the mind is, what's happening in the mind, that can explain that there's no problem with the mind except for the way that we sometimes misuse it. Descartes says, hey, one thing we should note, that the intellect, that by which we have ideas at all, right? The intellect, the house of ideas, if you will. The intellect is limited. There's only so many things that we know clearly. There's only so many clear and distinct ideas that we have in this mind of ours. I clearly and distinctly perceive differences between the wax here and the wax there. I clearly perceive the wax through it. Do I clearly and distinctly perceive that the wax has this color? No. But I clearly and distinctly perceive that the wax that was there has changed. So, interesting stuff. That might be a bad analogy. Oh well. All right, so the intellect is limited. Could God have given you a better intellect? Yes, Descartes says. God could have made you such that you understand more things. Is it a problem that God didn't? Not for God. Not for you, even. I mean, it might be a problem if it's something that you need to know, but there's no reason, right? Similarly, like, if you're living in a small house, is there anything wrong with the small house? Well, a bigger house would be more comfortable, maybe, would fit things better, maybe, but that doesn't mean that a small house, for being small, is faulty in some way, defective in some way. That's what Descartes needs here. So the intellect, sure, we're only capable of knowing so much well. That's not a problem, but it does open up possibilities here. The judgment is where error really resides, where error, formally speaking, lives. Descartes thinks that the intellect, it just houses the ideas, right? So if you've got the idea of a unicorn in your mind and you think to yourself, unicorn. You haven't made a mistake. Just thinking about a unicorn is not a mistake. But if you make a judgment based on, say, that idea and, I don't know, also the perception that you have of a narwhal tusk. If you make a judgment that there are unicorns, that unicorns are real, then you're making a mistake. If you use your idea of a circle to come up with, pi r squared is the formula for the area of a circle, that's fine, right? You're using your judgment correctly to judge that pi r squared is the area of a circle because you have a clear enough idea of the circle to get there. But your idea of the unicorn and of the tusk is not nearly clear enough, distinct enough to allow you to make that judgment. So Descartes says that's where error happens. Error happens when we make judgments about things that we don't understand, that we're not in a position to make judgments about. The will, the judgment, the will is the thing doing the judging, right? The will is unlimited. The will can make judgments about just anything. And that's not a weakness either. Give any proposition, you can say, yeah, I believe it, or no, I don't believe it. Not a problem. Not really. But it makes possible a problem. So, is there something wrong with the faculties that God has given us? Descartes is going to say, no. This one could be bigger. And this one is, unrestrained. But that just means that we have a job to do. We have to use our judgment properly restrict the bounds of the judgment so that we are only making judgments about things that we're capable of understanding. And if we do that, Descartes says, we will never, ever, ever make a mistake. In Meditation 4, along the way of giving this image of the intellect, the limited intellect, and the unlimited judgment, and the interplay between those being our role for responsibility, right? Restrain the will. This is a very Augustinian answer to this problem of error. He slips in, really, into this most Augustinian part of the work, this most pious part of the text. He slips in a dig at Aristotelian physics. I mentioned before that Descartes has three goals here, right? One is to refute skepticism, prove that some things can be known. You see how he's doing that, whether he's successful or not. Two is to prove the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, the real distinction between mind and body. We've seen part of that, not very successful. We'll get to the real distinction between mind and body in our next discussion. That happens in the sixth meditation. And thirdly is to establish new foundations for the sciences. He wants to supersede Aristotle, or maybe kind of undo the influence of Aristotle in European philosophy. So here he slips in this little dig at where are my words? So he slips in this little dig at final causes, right? Final causes, again, are those causes that operate through purpose, right? Understanding why something is the way it is by looking at the purpose of the thing. Okay. As I mull these things over more carefully, Descartes says in Meditation 4, it occurs to me first that there's no reason to marvel at the fact that God should bring about certain things, the reason for which I do not understand. Nor is God's existence therefore to be doubted because I happen to experience other things of which I fail to grasp why and how he made them. For since I know now that my nature is very weak and limited, whereas the nature of God is immense and comprehensible and infinite, this is sufficient for me also to know that God can make innumerable things whose causes escape me. For instance, a limited intellect. Why would God have given me a limited intellect when he could have given me a much grander one? It's no surprise that I don't know that, although he does say, and Spinoza echoes this too, that, well, God made more perfect intellects too, right? The difference in degree here seems to also reflect a difference in kind, and it's just clearly good that there be that variety there. I think that works much better in Spinoza, but anyway. Okay, so God is incomprehensible, immense, and infinite. This is sufficient for me also to know that God can make innumerable things whose causes escape me. For this reason alone, the entire class of causes which people customarily derive from a thing's end or purpose, I judge to be utterly useless in physics. It is not without rashness that I think myself capable of inquiring into the ends of God. So he slips in, and seemingly for pious reasons, this attack on a real central Aristotelian tool for understanding reality, final causes. He's changing the way that physics is done here already, right? Just slipping it in. Changing the way physics is done. Ultimately, Descartes is going to say that when we're doing physics, efficient causes are all we care about. Motion, rest, that is how we're going to explain how things change. That's how we're going to explain changes in the physical world. All right, so what does it get us then, right? He's proved that God exists. He's gotten past some of these doubts based on the error that we find ourselves making. Well, what we get from this is a kind of justification of our reasoning, right? If God gave me reasons, I don't have to worry about, well, I just have to worry about my senses. He's still going to be doubting his senses in general. Following Plato, Descartes does not think that the senses exist in us for, are we talking about final causes? For discovering truth. Not the kinds of truths that Descartes is after, right? It's helpful for discovering some very particular truths, and the particulars, of course, are very useful, right? I know where my book is because of the senses. I know where I am in my house because of the senses. But that's not real knowledge. That's not really the knowledge of what the world is like and how it works. Just like with the wax, right? I know that the wax is, yellow because of the senses, but that wax is suddenly not yellow anymore. So what do we do with that? So he's still not justified relying on his senses or believing that his senses are capable of telling him about the natures of things. What he's done away with now is basically any kind of no matter what, you're just going to be mistaken kind of doubt, right? Sure, the senses still deceive me when things are far away, when things are really small. Senses may be deceiving me even about grand things when I think that, say, the color of the wax is this essential part of it. That's a mistake. But it's conceptual analysis that he's comfortable with at this point, right? We're not jumping straight ahead to everything I think must be true. No, we're never going to get there, right? We're never going to get there. So, and he will justify some limited conclusions from the senses in the sixth meditation, and that's the topic of our next reading, the fifth and sixth meditation. But it's the conceptual analysis that he's really after. It's the conceptual analysis that he's really justified at this point. So what that does, and he demonstrates this really nicely in the fifth meditation, right? So the fourth meditation, he's just finished kind of overcoming his objection to, now God exists, so now I can rely on my reason. Fifth meditation, he's like, okay, let's start demonstrating what I can do now. I can use steps again pretty clearly. But what he says is, well, any time that I clearly and distinctly perceive that some predicate belongs to some subject, the predicate really belongs to the subject. So the fifth meditation, where we're going from here, has two purposes, two goals. One, of God, that he exists again. It's still kind of funny that he would approach it there, and then in the fifth meditation, let's prove it again, just for fun. Especially because, hey, if the third meditation doesn't work, then you don't get this, right? So the fifth meditation is giving us examples of how this reasoning works. The big example is the ontological argument for the existence of God. Now, ontological arguments are special. They don't take anything from the senses as the grist, right? It works entirely at the level of ideas. I've got an idea of God. What is that idea for Anselm? It's that than which a greater cannot be thought. And so if that God didn't exist, somehow there's a contradiction, right? To think that than which a greater cannot be thought doesn't exist is a contradiction, Anselm claims. Descartes' version of this, right? The idea of God he has is a being with all perfections. So if God is a being with all perfections, well, existence is a perfection, right? It's better to be than not to be, it seems. I know some people who would argue that that's not the case. More and more. Anyway, but if that's true, then it's seen clearly that God is a being with all perfections, and that existence is a perfection, then God exists. Comes out of that, right? just through analyzing, taking apart the concept. So that's not really what he's after here, proving that God exists. Now, the proof is a little different, right? The ontological argument doesn't just prove that God exists, but proves that God necessarily exists, and that might be an interesting difference to look at. But the big thing here is that Descartes is going to do the same kind of thing about the nature of material things. Not to prove that material things exist. He does that in the sixth meditation. But here, to prove the essence of material things. Once we can do the conceptual analysis stuff, not having to worry about an evil demon getting in there or just feeding you this idea, now I can start saying, hey, if these material things are real, like my senses are telling me that they are, maybe I can figure out what it is to be a material thing. Could I imagine a material thing with no color? Well, sure. In fact, I'm looking through the window now. There's lots of material things that don't have color. What is it, ultimately, to be a material thing? What is the property that if you have removed it from material things, well, you've removed the material thing too. You've taken too much, there's nothing left. And what he posits as that property is more or less taking up space, existing in three-dimensional space. He calls it extension, right? Material things essentially are extended into three-dimensional space. And since they're taking up space, well, they got all the modes of taking up space: size, shape, and then motion and rest, right? So size, shape, and some degree of motion and rest are essential features of material things. So notice, again, Descartes is, he took the world away from us, the world of Aristotle, through all the doubt, and then he starts slowly, one piece at a time, right, developing, right? I know this thing, I know that thing, I know that thing, I know that I exist as a thinking thing. I know that God exists. Oh, maybe that's where we get off if we're doing the refuting skepticism route. And then, having proved that God exists, well, now I can start trusting my reason more. What are material things? Well, if they exist at all, surely they're things that take up space. The world that we're getting back, again, the world that we're getting back is not Aristotle's world. It is a world of size, shape, motion, and rest, and change happens through that motion, right? Efficient causes. So we've got, put simply, a world of geometrical objects made real, changing, operating through straightforward impact.